I want you to know that today I'm speaking as the official spokesperson for the thousands of members of the NAACP across the state of North Carolina. We have more than 150 branches of adults and youth, and also speaking on behalf of our Forward Together Moral Monday Coalition. We chose today at 11 o'clock, and as of 10:30, we have released this formal open letter to Republican presidential candidate nominee Donald Trump. I want to read the letter now, emphasize some points, and then take your questions. The copy that the media have, you have some of the key quotes from inside of the letter. Dear Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump, your campaign, like the leadership of our legislature and governor, does not represent the politics of Lincoln, the call of justice, or the ethics of biblical evangelism. Instead, your campaign presents an extremist philosophy of hate, greed, racism, classism, xenophobia, and isolationism. You have come to speak in North Carolina on the day after the 4th of July. On July 5th, 1852, Frederick Douglass spoke to the Ladies' Anti-Slavery Society in Rochester, New York, and asked this question: what to the slave is the 4th of July? Today, on behalf of the thousands of members of the NAACP and the Moral Monday movement, thousands who've been arrested, thousands who have marched in this state, I ask you on their behalf, what to North Carolinians is the meaning of your campaign for president? So far, your campaign as the Republican nominee for president does not represent the ideals of Abraham Lincoln, the Republican who signed the Emancipation Proclamation and supported African Americans in their quest for freedom and citizenship. Your campaign does not represent the ideals of Abraham Galloway, an African American who rallied blacks to serve in the Union Army during the Civil War and helped to found the Republican Party in North Carolina. Nor does your campaign represent the ideals of Bishop J.W. Hood, a black Republican from North Carolina who helped craft North Carolina's Constitution during Reconstruction and became a national leader in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Nor does your campaign represent the moral vision of Theodore Roosevelt, who believed as a Republican in health care for all, a living wage, labor rights, environmental protection, and public education. That's right. In fact, all of these Republicans believed in equality, voting rights, public education, and decent wages. We do not object to Republican leadership as such, but to its failure to honor its own heritage. Despite, additionally, your support from people like Franklin Graham and Jerry Falwell Jr., people who claim to be evangelicals, neither your views nor theirs are authentic evangelicalism.
That's right. Please preach.
According to many scriptural texts such as Isaiah 10, Luke 4, Isaiah 58, Matthew 25, evangelicalism begins with a critique of a system of economic exploitation that keeps the poor in poverty, denies them living wages and decent housing. Biblical evangelicalism understands that there is a need for just and welcoming policies that take into consideration the needs of the poor, the sick, the imprisoned, and immigrants. Biblical evangelicalism is always rooted in love, mercy, and justice. The alleged evangelicals your campaign appears to court have instead created a borderline heresy that defines morality solely by anti-abortion, anti-gay, pro-gun, pro-tax cuts, pro-prayer and school policies. The gospel's central focus on the welfare of the poor and vulnerable among us does not seem relevant to this vaunted evangelicalism. True biblical evangelicalism never has to pit groups of people against one another, as in the Southern strategies of George Wallace and Richard Nixon. We regret to say that so far you seem to follow that flawed path. And so we ask, what does your candidacy mean for us here in North Carolina? Will you bring us together in a spirit of justice and mercy? Do you support the restoration of the Voting Rights Act here in a state that passed the worst voter suppression laws in the country since Jim Crow?
That's right.
Do you support Medicaid expansion, not as a liberal issue or as a conservative issue, but as a righteous issue? In a state where 500,000 eligible are being denied health care, 346,000 are white, 30,000 are veteran, and 90% are working poor. Do you support criminal justice reform in a state where more people, especially black men, have been exonerated from death row than any other state? Do you support a living wage in a state where nearly 80% of the population support raising the minimum wage and 1.9 million are currently living in poverty? Do you support environmental protections in a state with the worst coal ash spill in the nation? Do you support immigration reform in a state with one of the harshest anti-immigration bills in the country, where school children have been separated from their families by immigration and customs enforcement officials? Do you support public education policies? It's a right in North Carolina, a constitutional right. Do you support policies that resist resegregation and high poverty schools? Now, we notice that you seem to oppose the anti-LGBT House Bill 2 at first. Do you now support the complete repeal of HB 2 and its attacks not only on the LGBTQ community, but the working poor and those who experience employment discrimination? Do you welcome North Carolina's Muslims and stand against the denunciation of an entire religion, especially in a state where Muslim students have been murdered in hate crimes and where we currently have Muslims serving in our armed forces? Mr. Trump, and many in your camp say that you are not a racist at heart. Though Republican leaders acknowledge the racist content of some of your assertions. You say you love Latinos. You care about the sick and the poor. You say that you're not xenophobic. Well, please back up these claims with concrete policies.
That's right.
That is where you have to look to determine these things.
That's right.
Not just in your heart. That is not where you look for racism and xenophobia. But you look in the potential impact at the heart of the policies that you propose. So far, your candidacy, like the leadership of the North Carolina General Assembly and Governor McCoy, represents a form of extremism that has worked to hijack the Republican Party's noble ideals of the past, especially in the South. Your campaign has shown us what is at stake. We are fighting a battle between hate and hope. The hope of our nation is at stake. When you come to North Carolina today, remember that you are in the birthplace of the sit-in movement.
That's right.
You are in the state where Dr. King first delivered the I Have a Dream speech in Rocky Mount.
That's right.
You are in a state with a long history of interracial fusion politics that examines public policy from the perspective of whether or not the policy is morally defensible, constitutionally consistent, and economically sane. So far, your candidacy does not resonate with our highest moral values and best traditions, but instead it offers an eerie reincarnation of hate, meanness, and xenophobia that has not been so blatantly broadcast on the national landscape since George Wallace's presidential campaigns of 1968 and 1972.
That's right.
Still, we understand, Mr. Trump, that you alone are not to blame. You are the product of a Southern strategy.
Yes.
A strategy that was designed to pit black and brown and poor whites against each other. Since 1968, the Southern strategy lexicon has used code words like states' rights, entitlement reform, and tax cuts to cover up a race and class-based agenda.
That's right.
This Southern strategy has undermined public schools and used the word liberal as a racially coded phrase.
That's right.
This extremist approach has sought to stir up divisions and keep white, black, and brown, especially the poor, from building interracial fusion coalitions that promote a shared prosperity and would undermine a racist and greedy oligarchy. You, however, while not to blame, alone have taken the Southern strategy a step further.
That's right.
In the past, its devotees would hide behind their code words. What you are saying was only supposed to be in the back room,
That's right.
not on the platform.
That's right.
There is something to be said for candor, but in your case, it is poisoning our civil society.
Wow.
In this state, in our moral movement, we have stood together by the thousands.
That's right.
Black, brown, Asian, Native American.
That's right.
On the very street that I stand this morning, in 2014, more than 80,000 people stood together.
Yes.
Young and old and rich and poor and gay and straight and Jews and Muslims and Christians, Hindus, people without faith who believe in a moral universe.
Yes.
Our fusion politics are a proud legacy here. We saw the power of fusion politics when the former enslaved and white North Carolinians came together during Reconstruction and started the first state public school system in the South and expanded our democracy. We continue to see fusion politics today as our coalition resists regressive legislation. But we also have painful reminders of what can happen when fusion coalitions face backlash from those who use fear and hate to race bait themselves into power.
That's right.
We know what we need from any candidate, Democrat or Republican, who is running for public office, regardless of their political affiliation.
That's right.
What we need is a moral agenda,
Moral agenda.
centered in policies that establish justice,
Yes.
promote the general welfare, provide for the common good, help us to join hands in domestic tranquility
right.
as we all move forward together.
Yes.
These are the ideals, the better angels that should be at the center of our public debate and our discourse. Sign, yours in the struggle, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber, President of the North Carolina NAACP, on behalf of all of our members in both the NAACP and the Forward Together Moral Movement. At this time, if there are any questions from members of the media, I'd be honored to take them.
Reverend Barber, do you plan to go to the Trump event this evening? And if so, do you expect an answer to some of the items you're raising in this open letter?
We have sent this directly to the Republican headquarters. It's hard to find out exactly where he has a headquarters in the state when you check the websites. We certainly hope that he would answer. There are many people that will be attending. I understand some people were protesting. I personally would not be attending the rally because of some of the things we've seen in the past. As you know, we've seen people sucker punched and hit. But we will certainly be monitoring the rally by TV and by way of social media. But more importantly, what we call on North Carolinians and we call on all Americans to really monitor what's going on here. We call him out because regardless of party, no candidate should be given the free course to root their candidacy in racism, open racism, or closed racism for that matter.
That's right.
Xenophobia, religious hatred, immigration hatred, insults, and meanness, and then simply say, I can do this because I'm running for president. We've not seen this kind of blatant openness in the public square.
That's right.
Since the candidates of George Wallace, the candidacies of George Wallace in 68 and 72. Now we've seen the policies. And that's why we can't blame Trump alone. Because as we said, he is the product of the Southern strategy that began in 68 to take over and hijack the Republican Party. And in many ways, use, as I said, racial coded language. That's why when people ask the question, is someone racist? Then somebody will say, well, I don't know what's in their heart. You don't have to. You don't know what's in their policy.
That's right.
It's what's in the heart of your policy
That's right.
that proves whether or not one is promoting policies that will have what's called a disparate impact, a racially disparate impact. So that's the question. If you're not, do you support voter protection so we can stop race-based voter suppression?
That's right.
Do you support health care so that the working poor and the poor can have health care? Do you support living wages, knowing that 54% of African Americans make less than a living wage? Do you welcome all people, Muslims, Christians, Jews? And do you really, you can't really, I was really concerned a few weeks ago, and many of us around the country are deeply concerned. A few weeks ago, 1,000 clergy said they met with Donald Trump, and we didn't hear anything coming out of there that they challenged his stance on wealth.
That's right.
That him saying that the minimum wage was already too high. We didn't hear them say that they went in to challenge him on how he treats the poor and how he treats the sick.
That's right.
How he that's biblical evangelicalism. This notion that evangelicalism is only where you stand on prayer in the school, abortion, and homosexuality is actually, at best, it's a misrepresentation. At worst, it's a form of modern day heresy.
Yes.
And it really has no legs, no theological legs
None.
when you look at the biblical text.
That's right.
And when you look at what true events. So we can't, we can't have Mr. Trump trying to cover himself, if you will, in the cloth.
That's right.
And cover himself within religious garb, while in fact he is promoting policies of injustice and policies that will create disparate impact. And the Republican Party, many of those who are now so saying that how bad they are against him and they won't show up. Well, they should have said something when he was calling the president saying he wasn't born in America.
That's right.
That's right.
That was racism.
That's right.
Then it wasn't the N-word. But that was racist. They should have said something when Newt Gingrich called the president a food stamp president. Those are coded words. That's
right.
dog whistle politics.
That's right. Absolutely.
They should have said something when the Supreme Court overturned the Voting Rights Act.
Yes.
They should have been saying something all along when states like North Carolina and all through the South have blocked Medicaid expansion, even though Republican governors in other states like Ohio and Arizona and New Mexico have actually accepted Medicaid expansion. They should have said something, because once you loose meanness, and once you loose hatred, and once you loose racism, and once you loose xenophobia,
That's right.
it's hard to put it back in the box.
That's right. That's right.
And language is dangerous,
That's right.
because the language can lend itself to people trying to put flesh on the language and acting out on what is being said. That's why it's quite troubling for some of persons now saying to Mr. Trump, all you need to do is change your tone. Well, all that means is shh, be quiet. Don't say what you really feel.
That's right.
Even though that's your policy.
That's right.
Well, we don't need that kind of cloaking. We don't need him to change his tone. We need to change his trajectory.
That's right.
His political and policy trajectory is one that leads toward policies of racism and isolationism and hatred and meanness. And as a candidate, he has a responsibility, and more importantly, as a human being,
That's right.
to do better. And if not, he cannot claim the legacy of Abraham Lincoln,
That's right.
of Teddy Roosevelt, of Abraham Galloway, of J.W. Hill, or even my grandfather who was a Republican, because many persons were Republican back in the black people in the 1800s and early 1900s, because at that time Republicans were pro-voting rights and anti-slavery and pro-public education and pro-health care.
That's right.
So even today, the extremists in our own state, in the legislature, those that are supporting him, I guess the speaker, the Senate pro tem leader, the governor, if they line up with Trump, then that says that they line up with his policies. And we're not going to stand by while people are saying he's a racist, some of the things he says are racist, but he's the nominee, I have to support him. No. That kind of politics is the politics of immorality, not the politics of morality.
That's right.
When you will literally put party over principle, you will say that somebody is mean, they're racist, they're hatred, they shouldn't say that about Muslims, but I'm going to support them. And your basis is that somebody else is worse than them. No. If anything is good about the contest, and I say good, as Dr. King used to say, a negative good, is that Trump at least is revealing to us what we've known goes on in the back room.
That's right. That's right.
And he's given America, he's given North Carolina a chance to make a choice now.
That's right. That's right.
So not the choice between him and Hillary. That's not the issue. Because we hold all candidates accountable.
That's right.
But the real choice is between whether or not, as we begin headed toward, as we continue down the 21st century, as we head toward the 53rd anniversary of the March on Washington, and the 52nd anniversary of the 51st anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, the choice for North Carolinians in America is whether we're going to choose hope or hate, whether we're going to demand of our candidate. We have a real debate. Let's have a real debate on the real issue. Let's have a debate about economic sustainability and addressing poverty and labor rights. Let's have a debate about funding public education. Let's have a debate about health care and environmental protection and women's health and reforming the criminal justice system. Let's have a real debate about voting rights and immigrant rights and LGBTQ rights and equal protection under the law. But let us all refuse to allow hate and xenophobia and racism to hide behind a presidential campaign and boast itself in the public square and stick out its chest and say, basically, I can say what I want to say because this is the way to make America great again. Last time we heard that kind of language with this kind of animosity was during the days of deconstruction, when many white former owners of slaves were mad at the power that black and white people began to form and have. And they said, we got to take our country back.
That's right.
I'm coming just like out of Free State Joint. I just saw the movie last night. And I saw that history. Last time we heard this stuff about making the country great was when George Wallace and Dad as a governor to stand up segregation yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We got to make the country great. We got to stop this integration. We got to stop
that's right.
black and white people, young people working together. We have a choice in North Carolina.
That's right.
We got a choice in America. And I hope that Donald Trump will stop what he's doing and not just change his tone. But if he wants to be a Republican like Lincoln. Be a Republican like Teddy Roosevelt. Be a Republican like Abraham Galloway. Be a Republican like J.W. Hood, who helped rewrite North Carolina's Constitution in 1870. But don't be led astray by extremists and by a Tea Party type ideology that is divisive and that can really destroy and cut at the very heart of who we are as a nation.
That's right.
Quick question, just to follow up on the original one, there's no plan for any organized protest by the
I cannot say what there is or is not. I'm sure there will be people who will express themselves, and they certainly have a right to do that. I'm sure there will be people that will participate in a nonviolent way. We are in the midst right now of doing massive voter registration and voter education. That's where I'm going to do work today. That's where I was doing work this morning. Because what we're saying to people is this is our time, this is our vote, this is our Selma. If you want a voice, you need a vote.
Yeah.
So I'm going to spend today, when we have two presidential candidates in the in the state. I won't be in either convention hall, but I'll be out among the people in the streets, working with my brothers and sisters who are here. These are clergy here. As we continue to say to people, we must register, we must vote, and we must make our voices heard at the ballot box. And we must take seriously what people say. And more importantly, as I said again, when somebody asks me the question, is somebody a racist, or are they homophobic, or are they Islamophobic? And then somebody normally says, well, I don't know what's in their heart. I say this lovingly to the media, that's the wrong question. Question is not what's in their heart. The question is what's in the heart of their policies.
Yes. Yes.
What's in the heart of their policies. And if the policies create racial disparity, if the policies promote homophobia, if the policies hurt the sick, if the policies hurt the poor, then they have to own that they are what the policies say they are.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you so much. God bless you. Take care.